I know about your daughter, and I know why you really left town.
You didn't tell me the truth about what happened.
Donald adjusted his faded tie, completely unprepared for the evening. He thought he was meeting a yoga instructor for a casual dinner. Instead, sitting across from him in a custom titanium wheelchair was a billionaire CEO, about to utter a secret that would permanently shatter his entire reality. The alarm clock buzzed with the harsh, unforgiving tone of a Tuesday morning, though it was, in fact, Saturday. Donald Hayes slammed his palm against the snooze button, dragging his hands down his exhausted face. At 34, Donald felt like a man carrying the weight of a century on his shoulders. The small two-bedroom apartment in the quiet suburbs of Seattle was cluttered with the remnants of a life he was trying desperately to hold together. Stray crayons, half-finished coloring books, and plastic dinosaur with a missing leg littered the worn carpet. From the next room, the soft, rhythmic sound of a child's breathing reminded him exactly why he had to get out of bed. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was his entire universe. Since his wife, Sarah, passed away 3 years ago from a sudden, aggressive illness, Donald had been operating on a potent mix of adrenaline, caffeine, and unconditional love. He worked as a public high school history teacher, a noble profession that unfortunately barely covered the mortgage and the lingering mountain of medical debt his wife's treatments had left behind. As Donald padded into the narrow kitchen to start the coffee maker, his phone vibrated against the laminate countertop. The caller ID flashed with his older sister's name, Becca. Donald groaned inwardly. Becca was a force of nature, a corporate event planner who treated everyone's life as a project that needed managing. Lately, her project had been Donald's non-existent love life. Tell me you're not wearing the gray sweater with the hole in the elbow. Becca's voice boomed through the speaker before Donald even had a chance to say hello. Good morning to you too, Becca. And for the record, it's a moth hole, and it adds character, Donald replied, leaning against the counter and watching the coffee drip into the carafe. Donald, I am serious. Tonight is the night. I've set everything up. Her name is Victoria. She's amazing. Very active, loves the outdoors, super down to earth. She works in management, Becca rattled off, her tone entirely too cheerful for 7 in the morning. Donald rubbed his temples. Becca, we talked about this. I don't have the time or the money for a blind date. Besides, Lily has a slight fever, and I can't just leave her with a sitter when she's not feeling well. Nice try, Becca countered instantly. I already checked with Mrs. Gable next door. Lily's fever broke yesterday, and Mrs. Gable is thrilled to watch her tonight. I already paid her. You are going, Donald. It's been 3 years. You need to remember what it's like to talk to an adult woman who doesn't ask you for permission to use the restroom or need help tying her shoes. Donald sighed, looking at the framed photograph on the wall. It was him, his late wife, and a toddler Lily at the beach. The familiar pang of grief washed over him, duller now than it used to be, but still an ever-present ache. I don't even know where we're going. If she's this active, outdoorsy type, I'm not going rock climbing on a first date. My knees can't handle it. You're not rock climbing. It's dinner. At L'Eclipse, Becca said, a hint of hesitation slipping into her voice. Donald froze, his coffee mug hovering halfway to his mouth. L'Eclipse? Becca. That place has a 6-month waiting list and entrees that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I can't afford that. Did you tell her I'm a high school teacher? Don't worry about the bill, Becca said quickly. It's taken care of. I called in a favor. Just wear your nice navy suit, the one you wore to my wedding. Please, Donald, just 1 hour. If you hate it, you can fake an emergency and leave. Just promise me you'll go in with an open mind. Defeated, and knowing Becca would simply show up at his apartment and physically drag him out if he refused, Donald agreed. He spent the rest of the day in a state of mild anxiety. He played chutes and ladders with Lily, made macaroni and cheese for lunch, and tried not to think about the evening ahead, when Mrs. Gable arrived at 6 o'clock. Armed with a tote bag full of knitting and a warm smile, Donald had no more excuses. He pulled the navy suit out of the back of his closet. It was a little tight across the shoulders, a testament to the stress-induced late-night push-ups he used to tire himself out, but it was clean. He tied his only decent silk tie, splashed cold water on his face, and stared into the bathroom mirror. He looked tired, His dark hair was beginning to show premature flecks of gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes were deeper than a man in his early 30s should possess. Just 1 hour, he muttered to his reflection. The drive into the city was miserable. A typical Seattle drizzle had descended, turning the neon lights of the downtown restaurants into a blurry, intimidating smear. He managed to find street parking 4 blocks away to avoid the exorbitant valet fee at L'Eclipse. By the time he walked up to the heavy gold-leafed doors of the restaurant, the shoulders of his suit were damp, and his confidence was practically non-existent. L'Eclipse was an exercise in overwhelming opulence. The moment Donald stepped inside, the sounds of the rainy street were completely swallowed by thick velvet curtains and the soft, ambient hum of a string quartet playing on a raised mahogany platform. The air smelled of expensive truffles, old wine, and wealth. Donald felt like an absolute fraud. He approached the hostess stand, acutely aware of his damp shoulders and scuffed dress shoes. "Good evening, sir," the maitre d' said, his tone polite, but his eyes performing a rapid, practiced assessment of Donald's attire. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, it should be under." "Well, it might be under Hayes, or maybe Jenkins. My sister set it up. I'm meeting a Victoria," Donald stammered, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. The maitre d's expression shifted instantly from polite indifference to rigid attention. "Ah, Mr. Hayes." "Yes, of course. Madam has already arrived? Please, follow me." Donald followed the man through the maze of candlelit tables, noticing the covert glances from the city's elite. They were led to the back of the restaurant, toward a private, glass-enclosed alcove that offered a stunning, panoramic view of the city skyline. At the center of the alcove sat a single table, and at the table was Victoria. Donald stopped dead in his tracks. Becca's description echoed in his mind. Very active, loves the outdoors, super down to earth, works in management. The woman sitting before him was breathtaking, but in a severe, intimidating way. She wore a sharply tailored emerald green silk blouse that contrasted starkly with her pale skin and jet black hair, which was pulled back into a severe, flawless chignon. Her jewelry was minimal, but clearly worth a fortune. A single diamond pendant rested at her throat. But what caused Donald to halt was the sleek, state-of-the-art titanium wheelchair she was seated in. It wasn't a standard hospital chair. It looked custom-engineered, matte black, with discreet, high-tech control panels on the armrests. Victoria turned her head as Donald approached. Her eyes, a striking, icy blue, locked onto him. They were the eyes of a predator assessing prey. There was no warmth in them, only sharp calculation. "Mr. Hayes, I presume," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and devoid of any welcoming inflection. "Yes? Hi, you must be Victoria," Donald said, stepping forward awkwardly. He didn't know whether to offer his hand, considering the width of the table and her chair, so he settled for a stiff nod. "Please, sit," she commanded, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Donald sat down, immediately feeling the oppressive weight of the silence between them. He realized with a sinking feeling that Becca hadn't just omitted a few details. She had completely fabricated the premise of this date. A woman in a wheelchair couldn't exactly go rock climbing. But looking at Victoria, Donald realized the deception went much deeper. This woman didn't just work in management. She exuded an aura of absolute power. "I apologize for staring," Donald began, deciding to tackle the awkwardness head-on. "My sister Becca set this up. She left out a few details." Victoria's lips curved into a cold, humorless smile. "Did she? How fascinating." "Because my board of directors, who arranged this little social experiment, informed me that you were Donald Hayes, a ruthless corporate litigator for Pearson and Spector, known for aggressive merger acquisitions." Donald blinked, utterly bewildered. "A corporate litigator? I'm a high school history teacher. I graded 32 essays on the Industrial Revolution during my lunch break today." Victoria paused, the icy facade cracking for a fraction of a second as genuine surprise flickered in her eyes. She leaned back slightly in her chair. "A high school teacher. I see." It appears we have both been subjected to a severe breach of trust by our respective circles. Your board of directors set you up on a blind date? Donald asked, the absurdity of the situation temporarily overriding his nervousness. When you are the CEO of Sterling Global, and your company is preparing for an initial public offering that will break industry records, your public image becomes a matter of board interest, Victoria stated matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing the weather. They feel my image is, too, unapproachable. They believed a highly publicized romance with a shark-like lawyer would project power. A history teacher, however, is a significantly different demographic. Donald's heart skipped a beat. Sterling Global. It was one of the largest tech and real estate conglomerates on the West Coast. He was sitting across from Victoria Sterling, a woman whose net worth was casually tossed around in the billions on the morning news. Well, Miss Sterling, Donald said, a sudden wave of exhaustion washing over him. The charade was too much. He didn't belong here. I can assure you, the only thing I'm aggressive about is making sure my sophomores cite their sources. If you'd like, we can call this a mutual misunderstanding. I can leave, and you can tell your board whatever you need to. He placed his hands on the arms of his chair, preparing to stand up. He expected her to nod, to dismiss him with the wave of a manicured hand. Instead, Victoria's gaze sharpened. Sit down, Mr. Hayes. It wasn't a request, it was a directive. Out of sheer reflex, Donald stayed seated. You are already here, Victoria continued, her eyes scanning his damp suit and tired face. And frankly, the thought of returning to my empty penthouse to review quarterly reports is suddenly unappealing. You aren't a corporate spy, and you clearly aren't after my money, seeing as you had no idea who I was. Furthermore, you are the first person to look at me tonight and not immediately drop your gaze to my chair in pity. I don't pity you, Donald said honestly. You own half the city and you're buying dinner. If anything, I pity my bank account in comparison. A sharp, genuine laugh escaped Victoria's lips, startling them both. It was a brief sound, but it entirely transformed her face, making her look younger, softer. Very well, Donald, she said, resting her arms on the table. Let us endure this dinner, but I demand complete honesty. If we are to waste an hour of our lives, we will not do it with small talk. Deal? Deal, Donald agreed, finally relaxing his shoulders. Honesty, it is. In that case, you should know I have absolutely no idea how to read this menu. Everything is in French, and I'm pretty sure one of these appetizers costs more than my car. Victoria signaled a waiter with a micro movement of her chin. Allow me to order. And since we are being honest, Donald, you should know that my board doesn't just want a romance for optics. They want a romance to distract the press from the fact that my condition. She tapped the armrest of her wheelchair, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. Wasn't an accident. And the person who put me in this chair is currently sitting 3 tables behind you. Donald's blood ran cold. The exquisite ambient music of the string quartet suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn around, to identify the threat sitting just yards away, but the sheer intensity in Victoria's icy blue eyes held him captive. Do not look, Victoria murmured, her voice steady, picking up her crystal water glass with absolute composure. He is sitting at the corner booth with the current CFO of Sterling Global. If you turn around, you will alert him that we are discussing him. Right now, to him, you are nothing but a pathetic corporate pawn sent by the board to keep me docile. Donald swallowed hard, forcing his hands to remain still on the starched white tablecloth. Victoria, what are you talking about? What do you mean the person who put you in that chair? Victoria set her glass down, the condensation leaving a temporary ring on the linen. 2 years ago, I was driving down the Pacific Coast Highway. I had a custom-built Aston Martin, impeccably maintained, yet, miraculously, the brake lines completely failed as I was approaching a hairpin turn overlooking a cliff. The official police report cited a catastrophic mechanical defect. A tragedy, they called it. She leaned forward, the diamond at her throat catching the candlelight. It was not a defect, Donald. It was sabotage. And the man who orchestrated it, The man who smiled at my hospital bedside while the doctors told me I would never walk again is Conrad Bradley, my chief operating officer and my former fiancé. The words hit Donald like a physical blow. He thought of his own wife, Sarah, of the tragedy of her illness, which had been cruel but natural. What Victoria was describing was a level of human malice he had only ever encountered in the history textbooks he taught from. "Why?" Donald asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If he was your fiancé, why would he try to kill you?" "Because Sterling Global was transitioning," Victoria explained, her tone devoid of emotion, a defense mechanism built of steel and trauma. "My father founded the company, but I built it into an empire. Conrad wanted control. If I died before we were married, he had positioned himself within the board to step in as interim CEO. If we married, he would have equal claim. He chose the cleaner, faster route. Unfortunately for him, I survived." Donald rubbed his eyes, the absurdity of his Tuesday evening crashing over him. "Victoria, this is insane. If you know he did it, why isn't he in prison? Why are you having dinner in the same restaurant as him?" "Proof, Donald. The world of billionaires does not operate on suspicion, it operates on leverage," she replied coldly. "The mechanic who serviced my car vanished 3 days after the crash. The police were heavily incentivized to close the case quickly." Conrad covers his tracks perfectly. "For 2 years, I have smiled, nodded, and played the tragic, weakened executive while secretly spending tens of millions of dollars building a shadow investigation against him." The waiter arrived then, carrying 2 plates of something that smelled like heaven, but looked like modern art. Victoria offered a polite, practiced smile until the waiter retreated. "So, where do I fit into this?" Donald asked, pushing his plate aside. His appetite had completely evaporated. "I'm a public school teacher. I clip coupons. I don't know anything about corporate espionage or hostile takeovers." "That is exactly why you are perfect," Victoria stated. "Conrad knows everyone in my circle. He monitors my communications, my bank accounts, my board members. He anticipates my every move because we were raised in the same viper's nest. But you are a complete anomaly. You are off his radar. To him, you are just a bumbling lawyer the board forced me to date. He will underestimate you." Donald shook his head violently. "No, no. Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is no. I have a 6-year-old daughter. I'm all she has. I can't get involved in some billionaire revenge plot with a man who cuts brake lines." Victoria's gaze softened just a fraction, a fleeting moment of genuine empathy breaking through her armor. "I know about Lily, Donald." Donald froze. A primal, protective anger flared in his chest. "How do you know my daughter's name?" "When the maitre d' gave me your name, I had my security chief run a background check. It took him exactly 4 minutes," Victoria said unapologetically. "I know you are 34. I know you teach at Roosevelt High. I know you lost your wife Sarah 3 years ago to ovarian cancer. And I know you are currently drowning in $142,000 of medical debt that the insurance companies refused to cover." Donald felt stripped bare. The secret shame that kept him awake at night, the mountain of red ink that threatened to crush his small family, was laid out on the table next to the expensive French cuisine. "Don't talk about my family," Donald warned, his voice low and hard. "I'm not threatening you, Donald. I'm offering you a way out," Victoria countered, her voice equally intense. "I need a proxy. I need someone to attend a private gala with me this Saturday at Conrad's estate. It is a secure event. My usual security detail is not permitted inside. Conrad has a ledger, a physical, handwritten ledger in his private study that contains the offshore accounts he used to pay the mechanic. I need a distraction while I retrieve it." The restaurant hummed around them, oblivious to the high-stakes negotiation occurring in the glass alcove. Donald stared at the woman in the titanium wheelchair. She wasn't just a victim. She was a tactician preparing for war. "You want me to be a distraction?" Donald clarified, disbelief lacing his words. "What does that even mean? I spill a drink on him? I pretend to choke?" "I want you to be my fiancé," Victoria said smoothly. Donald choked on his own saliva, coughing into his napkin. "Your what?" "The board wants a romance? We will give them one. A whirlwind, impulsive engagement," Victoria explained, her corporate persona fully taking over. Conrad's greatest weakness is his ego. Seeing me move on, seeing me happy and legally binding myself to another man will infuriate him. It will make him careless. More importantly, as my fiancé, you will have unrestricted access to his estate on Saturday. You will keep him occupied in the grand ballroom while I access his study. You're out of your mind, Donald said, dragging a hand through his hair. I can't fake being engaged to a billionaire. I drive a 2012 Honda Civic. I will upgrade your car, Victoria replied instantly. Here are my terms, Donald. You play the role of my devoted fiancé for exactly 4 weeks. You attend the gala this Saturday. In exchange, tomorrow morning, I will wire $142,000 directly to your creditors, wiping out your medical debt entirely. Furthermore, I will set up a trust fund of $500,000 for Lily's college education. Donald's breath hitched. Debt-free. The words echoed in his mind like a siren song. No more final notices. No more choosing between paying the heating bill and buying Lily new winter boots. College fully paid for. It was a golden ticket, a miracle wrapped in a deeply dangerous bow. 4 weeks, Donald whispered, the teacher in him calculating the risk versus reward. And what if Conrad finds out? What if he tries to hurt me? Or worse, Lily. Lily will be protected. I have an elite private security firm. 2 guards will be stationed outside your apartment building, 24/7, posing as utility workers. She will be safer than she has ever been, Victoria promised, her eyes locking onto his. And as for you, I will not let him hurt you. You have my word. Donald looked at the untouched food, then out the rain-streaked window at the city. He thought of his wife, fighting until her last breath. He thought of his daughter, sleeping in the next room, under the watchful eye of a neighbor. He was exhausted from surviving. He wanted to live. Before Donald could open his mouth to answer, the air in the alcove shifted. A tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes suddenly materialized at the edge of their table. Victoria, darling. I thought that was you hidden away back here, the man said. His voice was rich, charismatic, and laced with absolute poison. Victoria's posture went rigid, but her face transformed into a mask of polite surprise. Conrad. What a coincidence. I didn't see you come in. I was having a working dinner with the CFO, Conrad said, his eyes sliding off Victoria and locking onto Donald with a look of utter disdain. And who is this? Don't tell me the board actually forced you to go through with their little matchmaking stunt? Donald felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Up close, Conrad Bradley radiated a terrifying, quiet menace. This was the man who had ordered the cutting of the brake lines. Actually, Victoria started, her voice faltering just a fraction, a calculated display of weakness for Conrad's benefit. This is a sudden surge of adrenaline, fueled by years of repressed anger at the unfairness of the world, flooded Donald's veins. He didn't think, he just acted. Donald stood up, smoothing the front of his cheap navy suit, and extended his hand toward the billionaire. Donald Hayes, he said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a commanding authority he usually reserved for breaking up fights in the school cafeteria. I'm Victoria's fiancé. Conrad's smug smile vanished instantly. He looked at Donald's outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake, then slowly raised his eyes to meet Donald's gaze. Fiancé? Victoria and I work very closely together, Mr. Hayes. She hasn't mentioned you. We prefer to keep our private lives out of the boardroom. Conrad, Donald, lied flawlessly, seamlessly stepping into the role. He moved around the table and placed a protective, gentle hand on Victoria's shoulder. He felt her muscles tense in shock beneath the silk, but she didn't pull away. Especially considering the stress she's been under lately. Conrad's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He finally took Donald's hand, his grip crushing, an overt display of dominance. Donald squeezed back just as hard, refusing to break eye contact. Well, Conrad said softly, pulling his hand away. Congratulations are in order. I suppose. I look forward to properly getting to know the man who captured our CEO's heart. You must be a very brave man. Mr. Hayes. Just a lucky one, Donald countered evenly. Conrad lingered for a second too long, his gaze shifting to Victoria's wheelchair, a sickening smirk playing on his lips, before he turned and walked back into the main dining room. Donald let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding and collapsed back into his chair. His hands were shaking. Victoria stared at him, her icy blue eyes wide with genuine shock. For the first time all evening, the billionaire CEO looked entirely speechless. "Well?" Victoria finally breathed, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "It appears, Mr. Hayes, that you are hired." The next morning, Donald woke up, convinced the previous night had been a stress-induced hallucination. Then he checked his banking app. The balance of his medical debt account, which had haunted his every waking moment for 3 years, read exactly $0. A secondary account had been opened in his name, holding a pending transfer of $500,000 designated as an irrevocable trust for Lily. Victoria Sterling had kept her word before he had even lifted a finger. The terrifying reality of the situation crashed down on him. He was no longer just a history teacher. He was an active operative in a billionaire's revenge plot. By Wednesday, Donald's world had been entirely upended. A sleek, understated 2024 Volvo XC90 replaced his dying Honda Civic in the driveway. A tailor arrived at his apartment while he was at school, leaving behind a charcoal Brioni suit that fit him with frightening perfection. But the most jarring change was the security. True to her word, Victoria hadn't hired standard mall cops. She had contracted Gavin DeBecker & Associates, the elite, real-life private security firm known for protecting Hollywood A-listers and foreign dignitaries. 2 intensely observant men in nondescript utility gear were now permanent fixtures outside his apartment building. Knowing Lily was under the watch of the best protection money could buy allowed Donald to focus on the terrifying task ahead. Saturday night arrived with the ominous weight of a looming storm. Conrad Bradley's estate was a sprawling, modern architectural marvel perched on a cliffside in Mercer Island, practically dripping with dark money and hostile intent. As Donald drove the Volvo up the winding driveway, Victoria sat silently in the passenger seat. She was breathtaking in a deep sapphire gown that draped perfectly over her chair, but her profile was tight, carved from marble. "The study is on the ground floor, east wing," Victoria instructed, her voice devoid of any tremor. "It operates on a biometric lock, but my chief of security managed to clone Conrad's thumbprint from a wine glass he discarded at a board meeting. I have the silicone print. I just need 10 minutes. "And if he doesn't want to talk to me?" Donald asked, adjusting his silk tie nervously. "What if he just walks away?" "You are my new, impulsive fiancé. You represent a variable he hasn't calculated," Victoria said, turning her icy blue eyes to him. "Conrad is a narcissist. He won't be able to resist the urge to probe you for weaknesses, to see if he can break you. Let him try. Just keep him in the grand ballroom." Donald nodded, pulling up to the valet. He stepped out, walked around the car, and seamlessly assisted Victoria as her custom titanium wheelchair descended via the vehicle's automated ramp. As they approached the heavy oak doors of the estate, Donald gently took the handles of her chair. It was an intimate gesture they had practiced, a silent show of unity. The gala was a sea of velvet, diamonds, and forced smiles. The moment Victoria and Donald entered the ballroom, the ambient chatter dropped noticeably. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the CEO of Sterling Global and the unknown man standing protectively behind her chair. It didn't take long for the predator to circle. Conrad parted the crowd with practiced ease, holding 2 flutes of champagne. "Victoria, Mr. Hayes, I am thrilled you decided to grace us with your presence." He extended a glass to Donald. "Champagne?" "No, thank you," Donald replied smoothly, stepping slightly in front of Victoria's chair to block Conrad's direct line of sight to her. "I like to keep a clear head." Conrad chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "A cautious man. I admire that. Tell me, Donald, what is it you do?" Victoria is notoriously tight-lipped about her personal conquests. "I'm a teacher," Donald said. "History." Conrad's eyebrows raised in exaggerated amusement. "Fascinating. A noble, if entirely unprofitable, pursuit. How exactly does a high school teacher cross paths with the most powerful woman in Seattle corporate real estate?" "We met at a charity function," Victoria interjected, her tone light but carrying an edge of steel. Donald has a passion for educational philanthropy. Now, if you'll excuse me, Conrad, I see Marcus from the SEC near the terrace, and I need a word with him. Before Conrad could object, Victoria skillfully maneuvered her chair through the crowd, heading toward the terrace doors. Donald knew the layout. The terrace wrapped around the building, providing a direct, unmonitored path to the east wing. Conrad watched her go, his jaw clenching slightly. He turned his attention back to Donald, his eyes darkening. She's a remarkable woman, isn't she? Strong-willed, stubborn. Sometimes that stubbornness gets her into terrible accidents. Donald felt a cold sweat break out on his neck, but he forced a polite smile, leaning in closer to the billionaire. I've read a lot of history, Conrad. The thing about men who try to conquer empires by force is that they almost always underestimate the resilience of the people they step on. Conrad's smile vanished. Is that a threat, Mr. Hayes? It's a historical observation, Donald countered calmly. Take the Roman Empire, for example. For the next 8 minutes, Donald engaged the COO in a relentless, high-level debate on historical warfare tactics, subtly drawing parallels to corporate hostile takeovers. He used every pedagogical trick he had honed over a decade of teaching apathetic teenagers, forcing Conrad to defend his intellectual ego. The billionaire was visibly irritated, entirely focused on verbally dismantling the history teacher. 9 minutes. Donald checked his watch covertly. Just 1 more minute. Suddenly, Conrad's earpiece, a discreet device he wore for event security, buzzed. Conrad tapped it, listening for a split second. The color drained from his face, replaced instantly by a mask of pure, homicidal rage. "Excuse me," Conrad snarled, abandoning the conversation entirely and sprinting toward the east wing. Donald's heart stopped. He knows. Donald didn't hesitate. He abandoned all pretense of being a polite guest and sprinted after Conrad, shoving past bewildered socialites and minor celebrities. He tore down the opulent, dimly lit hallway of the east wing, just in time to see Conrad kick open the heavy mahogany doors of his private study. Donald rushed into the doorway and froze. Victoria was sitting calmly in the center of the room. On the heavy oak desk in front of her was a thick, leather-bound ledger. But she wasn't alone. Conrad had crossed the room in 3 massive strides, grabbing the armrests of her wheelchair, leaning over her with an expression of unhinged violence. "You stupid, crippled bitch," Conrad hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "Did you really think you could send a public school teacher to distract me while you broke into my sanctuary? I am going to throw you out of the window myself and call it a tragic suicide." Donald lunged forward. "Get away from her!" He tackled Conrad, the sheer momentum of his desperation throwing the larger man off Victoria's chair and onto the Persian rug. The 2 men grappled, crashing into a side table, sending expensive crystal decanters shattering onto the floor. Conrad was ruthlessly strong, landing a sickening punch to Donald's ribs, but Donald possessed the adrenaline of a father who had everything to lose. He pinned Conrad's arm back, pressing his forearm against the billionaire's throat. "Donald, stop." Victoria commanded, her voice ringing out clearly over the chaos. Donald hesitated, his chest heaving, his grip still tight on Conrad. Victoria calmly picked up the leather ledger from the desk. She didn't look frightened. She looked utterly, terrifically victorious. "He's right, Conrad," Victoria said, smoothing a wrinkle from her gown. "It was a terribly obvious distraction. You're too paranoid not to have silent alarms in your private study." "I knew you would catch me." Conrad choked out a laugh from beneath Donald. "Then you're a fool. You're trespassing, attempting theft. I will ruin you." "I don't think you will," Victoria replied, pressing a button on the control panel of her wheelchair. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors behind Donald swung wide open. Standing in the doorway were 3 uniformed Seattle Police Department officers, flanked by 2 men in sharp suits flashing FBI badges. Behind them, looking entirely horrified, stood the entire executive board of Sterling Global. Conrad stopped struggling, his eyes widening in absolute terror. "What is this?" Conrad demanded, his voice cracking. "This is checkmate," Victoria said coldly. "I didn't need to steal the ledger, Conrad. I just needed you to admit what you did while the authorities were listening." She tapped the diamond pendant at her throat. State-of-the-art microtransmitter, broadcast directly to the precinct, and piped into the wireless headsets of our esteemed board members who thought they were receiving an audio tour of your art collection. The FBI agent stepped forward. Conrad Bradley, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Victoria Sterling, conspiracy to commit fraud, and corporate espionage. Let him up, Mr. Hayes. Donald slowly released his grip, stumbling backward, wincing as the pain in his ribs finally registered. He watched, stunned. As the police hoisted the billionaire to his feet, slapping handcuffs onto his wrists, Conrad's face was a portrait of shattered arrogance. As he was marched past Victoria, she didn't even look at him. She looked at Donald. Once the room cleared of the authorities and the deeply shaken board members, a profound silence settled over the study. The ruined crystal on the floor glittered in the dim light. Donald leaned against the doorframe, clutching his side. You used me as bait. I used you as the shield I knew you were capable of being, Victoria corrected softly, steering her chair closer to him. The icy exterior had completely melted, leaving behind a woman who looked exhausted, relieved, and genuinely apologetic. I knew he would try to threaten me. I needed the confession on tape, but I also knew I needed someone who wouldn't back down when he lunged. You saved my life tonight, Donald. You paid off a mountain of my debt, Donald replied, a tired, genuine smile breaking through his wince. Consider us even. Victoria looked up at him, her blue eyes searching his face. The contract was for 4 weeks of pretending to be my fiancé. It's been 3 days. What do you intend to do with the rest of your time? Donald looked at the brilliant, formidable woman in front of him. He thought about the laughter they had shared in the car ride over, the way she had seamlessly protected him from the board's scrutiny, and the fierce, protective loyalty that had flared in his chest when Conrad threatened her. Well, Donald said gently, pushing himself off the doorframe and walking toward her. Lily has a soccer game next Saturday. They usually need someone to bring the orange slices. It's not exactly a high society gala, but it's a start. Victoria Sterling, the ruthless billionaire CEO who had survived an assassination attempt and taken down her greatest enemy, smiled. It was a radiant, beautiful expression of pure hope. I'll have my assistant clear my schedule, Victoria said. And Donald? I prefer mandarin oranges. As they left the estate together, leaving the wreckage of Conrad's empire behind them, Donald knew his life would never be the same. He had walked into a blind date expecting an awkward hour of small talk. Instead, he had walked into a war zone, survived, and somehow, miraculously, found exactly what his broken family needed. If this story left you breathless, you won't want to miss what happens next. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the shocking twists in the upcoming parts. What do you think Victoria's secret is? Let us know in the comments below, and we will see you in the next episode.
Hi, my name is Shalom Morel Hunger, the owner and manager of Shalom Morel Hunger. After watching the video, single dad was tricked into a blind date with a paralyzed woman, which she told him broke him. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the honesty and vulnerability between two people who were both carrying emotional weight in different ways. Beneath the awkward situation, there was a deeper reminder that everyone has struggles we can't immediately see. Sometimes one sincere conversation can completely change how we look at another person, and even ourselves. Do you think people are too quick to judge others based on first impressions or circumstances? And have you ever had a conversation that unexpectedly changed the way you viewed someone? Stories like this make me think about how important it is to slow down, listen carefully, and treat people with a little more understanding in everyday life. If this story connected with you in some way, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this, feel free to like and subscribe for more whenever you're ready.